there was a lot of debate internally going on within the company. Should the Punch be an SUV or should it be a Wagon R fighter?
The other thing that has also worked in the Punch's favor, safety, the G NCAP rating and, the Bharat NCAP rating.
Punch actually has taught us a lot of lessons, and actually busted a lot of myths.
Another card that they are playing very well, in fact, literally as a small little card printed on the back, it says vocal for local.
Absolutely taken Maruti head on its own turf. It's a sub 4 meter car. It's really gone into the lion's den, and it's come out fighting. Welcome to our weekly dose of all things automotive, our Deep Drive podcast powered by Kotak Mahindra Prime. I'm Hormazd Sorabjee.
And I'm Sergius Barretto. And Hormazd, we've got a very interesting topic today. Something about Tata finally taking on the bigwigs Maruti, right?
I think it's all about the Punch overtaking the Wagon R and becoming the best-selling car in India. I think it really is a big deal because, historically for decades, Maruti has, just by sheer virtue of its volumes, has kind of ruled the top 10 charts quite a bit. But we've been seeing a bit of a shakeout over there. But never have we seen anything other than a Maruti at the top. And for the first time, really, we've seen the Punch really take that spot and hang on to it. And for, let's say, the first 6 months of 2024, we've seen the numbers, 110 Punches sold for the first 6 months, about 199,000 for a Wagon R. And in some months, the Punch even doing 19,000 cars a month. Now, that's amazing because if you go back to the time when the Punch was launched, I think in around 21 or so, it was launched in 21, I think Tata as a whole was doing about 25,000 units. So it really speaks volumes of not only the Punch as a product, but Tata Motors, how it's really kind of ballooned and come of age. It's a real success story of an Indian brand and an Indian product which has, been at the top. Well, Maruti also is very Indian, but,
yes.
This is really a homegrown indigenous product, let's say, that's really punched above its weight. And, before we get into it, I want to give a little bit of an anecdote that in 2002, I think it was July 2002, the Indica came within a whisker of beating the Maruti 800 at that time as the best-selling car. But there were some issues in the Tata factory and they couldn't do it. To be honest.
So you mean production issues?
Production issues, yeah. They came up, I think they were just 400 units less. At that time, it was, I think, 8,900 units for the 800 and just 8,500 or something for the Indica. Those were the numbers then. The best-selling car was just that. So it also tells you how we moved on in terms of volume and how we've grown as a market as well. But yeah, the Indica came within a whisker of toppling the 800. It was really a big deal. But then I think 800 cut prices and, it just ran away again. So Tata could never manage that. But now, over 20 years later, Tata has done it. The Wagon R has been beaten by the Punch.
Exactly.
Punch has really beaten the Wagon R.
And ironically, Hormazd, you've got a very interesting story here. Not just have they beaten Maruti, they beat the Wagon R with the Punch, but it's a car that it was originally intended to take on, correct?
Now, that is a very interesting story. So let's rewind back to, when the Punch was being conceived. It was way back in 2014, actually. So it's really taken a long time. At that time, the Tata Motors X4 Alpha platform was being developed. And typically, to kind of, what they say, bookend the platform. You can't just do one model. You have to do multiple models, 2 models at least, to kind of, get the scale out of the platform and justify the investment. So they had the Altos, which was going, and the Punch, both being developed at the same time. But the Punch came a year later, maybe even more than a year later than the Altos. And why was that? Because there was a lot of debate internally going on within the company. Should the Punch be an SUV or should it be a Wagon R fighter? Now, to be honest, at that time, the president was Mayank Parikh, who was from Maruti, and he was pushing hard for it to be a Wagon R, saying that, Wagon R is so popular, let's just follow that formula. People really don't care about the styling, that sort of thing. And, that was the way to go.
Or like another tall boy, like a Santro.
Exactly, another tall boy. In fact, it was originally conceived with a max of 14-inch wheels Today the Punch is 16
inch. Clearly a hatchback.
It was a hatchback with maximum interior space, while the Altos was a sporty, racy kind of, let's say hatchback. This was a more functional hatchback. I think luckily sense prevailed. And I think at that time it was when they were going back and forth, and they lost a whole year in this process, deciding what the concept should be.
Just which direction.
I think they spent even maybe around 50 crores in just doing multiple clay models, or let's say whatever the pound rate, about 4 million pounds at that time. So it was crazy. I think this was what was being debated. Thank God for Tata Motors, they went the Punch way. And, at that time, we have to hand it actually to even Cyrus Mistry, I think, who took that final call and saying, no, let's go the SUV way. And finally, the Punch is what it is. And a classic example of Tata Motors getting it right on Maruti's turf where so many others have failed. I mean, For me, one glaring, let's say, example or comparison which one can make is with Mahindra's KUV 100.
Exactly.
Probably one of the ugliest vehicles I've seen. Really very...
I would move probably from there, but yes.
Yeah. And it just didn't work at all, and in fact, then Mahindra also realized that wasn't their space and they exited from that altogether. But Tata Motors, went in there with this clever formula of an absolute sturdy looking SUV. It had all the SUV cues which others didn't have, the high bonnet, very good styling, very well proportioned. And I think it was the design, the stance, that robustness of the vehicle that really kind of, gave it an edge over others in which it was competing and differentiated it from, let's say, the Marutis over there. So really, it's absolutely taken Maruti head on its own turf. It's a sub 4 meter car. It's really gone into the lion's den. And, it's come out fighting. Absolutely.
No, and for me also, Hormazd, it's so interesting because technically, you had the Santro, which was a competitor to the Wagon R. We know what happened to the Santro. They tried to make a comeback with the Santro, the same brand name. That didn't catch on as well. Like you said, Mahindra tried with the KUV. And interestingly, the KUV was that formula saying that, we are going to bring a sort of gun to a sword fight. So let's not come in with another tall boy hatch. Mahindra, I remember talking to a lot of their people. They were saying that we are going to...
But what was it? Is it a bird? Is it a plane?
Yeah, KUV, you never knew that. So they thought it was an SUV.
Yeah.
The tagline, the young SUV. That was penned by a company which kind of, I think, were forced down that thing of it's got to be an SUV.
Yeah.
But like you said, it was so confusing. You didn't know what it was. Really.
So I think the design really, did it in. It was a quasi hatchback. It didn't have the right proportions. And I think, again, clearly an example of how design is really a differentiator.
Exactly.
And I think what's interesting is that it also tells you a lot about the Punch buyer, which sometimes even we tend to miss. I think from what we understand, a lot of them are first-time buyers. Originally, it was 50%. Now, what I understand is 70% of Punch buyers are first-time buyers. So, we were skeptical about the engine. Let's be honest, Tata Motors don't have the best petrol engines.
Yeah, and, we've said it lacks punch.
Yeah, we said it lacks punch. But obviously, that didn't make too much of a difference because for the first-time buyer, it's got enough punch. And what he wants is that status, that image, that high seating position. It originally, they had a lot of appeal in smaller metros. Roads are bad. They are congested. The small compact dimensions actually played to the Punch's, appeal. Yes, it doesn't have the best space at the back, but it's got a fair minimum. It is cramped at the back. And, clearly, again, it goes to show that you don't necessarily in this category have to have the biggest back seat. You just have to have the minimum amount of space. And it works. So Punch actually has taught us a lot of lessons, and actually busted a lot of myths. I'll be honest, some of our own myths, which we enthusiasts think, there's no turbo, hasn't got that punch, and that sort of thing. But honestly, it's really not, made a difference. But I think also, Sergius, it's not just the petrol engine, but the other derivatives, which have really given the Punch, the volumes. And just 50% or 51% of it are now ICE engines. The rest are all CNG and EVs. And so that's also, I think, a very smart strategy of Tata Motors to enhance the Punch's appeal with multiple powertrains.
Exactly.
I think even the CNG is better than the Wagon R.
Yeah, absolutely. Almost the CNG accounts for about 33% of their sales, from the Punch sales. And Wagon R, yes, as you said, they have CNG too. But, I think Tata's execution for the CNG was brilliant. For one, we know the dual cylinder, it's a very clever idea.
The dual cylinder.
Yeah, the dual cylinder sort of, instead of having one big cylinder take up all your boot space, two little small guys below. Brilliant. I think it's sometimes the simplest ideas which you think, why didn't somebody think of that? So I think that played in very well. Secondly, even something as simple as the ECU. So on Tata, on the Punch CNG, they have one ECU. It's like a unified ECU taking care of the engine, whether it's running on CNG or on petrol and switching between the two. So it's more seamless, better integration. Whereas on the Wagon R, it's a dual ECU. So when you switch fuel modes, you're actually switching ECUs too. And then there's also this thing where, Tata very proudly say and sort of, as use it as a marketing thing, saying start on CNG mode. You don't have to have petrol always, as you know, on Wagon R.
And it's made CNG aspirational, which I think Maruti has not done with the Wagon R.
Exactly.
I mean, the fact is you still have to queue up. That's quite an issue that you can't get away with.
True.
I keep seeing these long CNG queues. So
Exactly.
but it has made, CNG a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely. They've not limited it to lower variants. You can get a well-spec'd CNG, and like I was saying, the Wagon R, they will say that you can start it, but it's called forced CNG start.
Right.
So very clearly telling you that, this is not the ideal way to start the CNG in a Wagon R, whereas on a Punch brochure, it says start in CNG mode. Yeah. So I think the CNG execution on the Punch was a lot better than with Wagon R.
And then I think there's the EV. Punch EV. I think I just drove to.
You can head today.
Yeah, just to get a feel of it for this podcast. And I think honestly, I was just thinking, as a city EV, actually, there's nothing better. Because firstly, it's compact. It really takes the potholes well. I mean, this is monsoon time. You find lots of craters around. Got a superb ride. It's got enough punch, what the petrol doesn't have. It's the best automatic you can get.
Correct.
In fact, if you take the automatic with the ICE version, yeah. So if you take that, I think that is just some maybe 22% or something. I'm not sure what that number is. But if you add the EV, then overall automatic jumps about
the share.
The share jumps, I think 36% or something. So again, it's the best automatic, which is what it is. And it's just super to drive. It's got decent range, and it just is probably, and we've said that, is probably the best urban EV you can have. Of course, now EVs have their own issues of charging. People can't find charging at home, but that's more part of the ecosystem than the product itself.
True. And, incidentally, there was another very funny sort of thing when you think about it. Here too, the Wagon R could have had an EV. If you remember, they were testing the
exactly. Yeah, that's right. Wagon R could have had an EV. Yeah. But, I think, again, Sergius, that's a brilliant point. And it's gone back to this whole concept of we don't want to do anything half-baked. We want to have our own full skateboard platform. They're coming out. The new one is a full skateboard. It's a global product. We want to do it right. That's all very well. But at the end of the day, the customer doesn't mind what Tata is giving. So, you can't decide what the customer wants. And I think that's what Maruti did with their EVs, thinking that, the Wagon R would be compromised. Frankly, I think, they're part of, let's say, a global conglomerate now. It's not just Maruti, Suzuki, it's Toyota, everyone. So they don't have that agility and flexibility of Tata to make certain decisions. But I think, again, as you said, they got to the market early, with this. It's a Sigma platform. It's not just an ICE derivative. Right. They've done a lot more. They flattened the floor. Yes. So I think clearly, it's really paid off. But I think one thing which we have to draw out is that the number of Tatas being sold and, the volume that has gone up, the service and reliability has become an issue.
And even with the EVs.
With the EVs, I think software is a problem. I think even in our long-term test thing, we got this high voltage error which
we've had it
popping up. I think that's what Tata Motors need to address. But from what I understand, also out of all their cars, the Punch, probably because the ICE version is quite simple, is the most reliable of the lot. So they, according to Tata Motors, they do admit that the volume has kind of overwhelmed their service, let's say capacity. They are working towards it, but out of all the models, the Punch is one of the most reliable. And frankly, a first-time car buyer is probably the most demanding. So I think, over there, if people are constantly going back to the Punch and, selling 18, 19,000, that is just a phenomenal volume. And if you look at something like the Exter, which in many ways outdoes the Punch in so many areas, whether it's space, whether it's even the engine, but it just hasn't been able to kind of, in fact, catch the fancy of the buyer as much as the Punch does. So really, I think, hats off to Tata Motors for just having the right kind of proof of concept with the HBX, which they had showed at the auto show. And they've just got that right. And I think they've really understood what consumers want in design, something that's not too loud in your face, something that's pleases everyone, but yet has a very strong aesthetic appeal.
Exactly. Yeah. And actually, oddly enough, the Exter, and it's interesting that you mentioned it, it's actually the closest competitor, I would say, to a Punch in terms of, the sort of quasi or micro SUV traits. Tall stance, elevated seating position, good ground clearance. But yeah, you're right. I think Punch has been just like remarkably on the spot here.
But as you said, it's a quasi SUV. I'm not sure about the design. Is it a hatch? Is it an SUV? Punch makes no bones about it. The way it looks, the high bonnet,
correct.
The chunky wheel arches.
Exactly.
It can go up to 16-inch rims. Thank God they did that. They didn't stick to 14, which was originally planned. It's got a proper SUV stance. I mean, the other one really is the Ignis, which is a neither here nor there crossover. KUV was, as we spoke about, completely failed. So I think it all boils down then to, getting that sense of aesthetic right, that design right. And it also goes to show how the Indian car buyer is evolving. From no longer being wanting to just be seen in a hatchback, they've become hugely aspirational. I mean, if 70% of Punch customers are first-time buyers, it just goes to show how they've leapfrogged the hatchback and jumping into a compact SUV.
Exactly. And, I think, Hormazd, the other thing that has also worked in the Punch's favor, and I know you don't particularly like this maybe area, but safety, the GNCAP rating and, the Bharat NCAP rating.
It definitely has. It has helped. I mean, I think, honestly, my view on that is it's not like the ultimate metric of safety. It's a very important one, but a lot of other things that determine safety, even in a crash. There's so many things that are not counted, whether how cars perform in underrides or rollovers, which GNCAP really don't, let's say measure over there. It is an important metric, but I think, again, Tata Motors have played that card beautifully. Right. It's made out like their car is, you shouldn't be riding in anything else that's unsafe. And conversely, Maruti have got a bad reputation.
Spectrum, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And to be honest, their cars are light. Their cars are, not very heavy. That doesn't help in terms of a crash. But I think Tata have really kind of played this safety card also very well, which has helped too. I think overall it's really the design and the aspiration the Punch kind of, evokes that has made it the success that it is, despite may not be having the best mechanics.
Exactly. And almost, another card that they are playing very well, in fact, literally is a small little card printed on the back, it says vocal for local. I think that is also going with their favor. Right?
You're right. I think, again, I think the whole world is becoming less globalized and more nationalistic, and I think, these kind of jingoism is quite high, whatever, I mean, we know what's happening politically all over the world. And I think, yes, it has helped. And there is a certain pride in having something in. I mean, look, all of us, when an Indian company does well, we feel good about it. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think what's happened is that while Tata cars still have a long way to go in terms of the ultimate quality or reliability of, let's say, a Toyota, still a huge gap. They've achieved a certain level. So I think basically you do get a few niggles, but that somehow is compensated, or the customers tend to overlook that with the other things you get. Great pricing. We've not talked about the pricing also. Pricing has been very good, I think, on the Punch. I mean, it's you look at other, let's say, sub-compact SUVs. I don't know what you call this category, micro SUV. It's segmented so much. Let's say a Kiger or a Magnite, which are slightly larger, going up to the 4-meter envelopes. Punch is much cheaper.
Exactly.
I think the Fronx also, which is another quasi SUV, is much cheaper. But again, Fronx is again a classic example of, people wanting that practicality and space and the look over the performance. I mean, 80% of Fronx or maybe 90% is 1.2 natural. Yeah. No one goes for the turbo. So Tata Motors sensibly, or I said they didn't need to put a turbo in there and push the Punch's price up into this next category. I think they also wanted a gap with the Nexon. Sadly, as far as the EV goes, I think the Punch EV has really cannibalized Nexon EV sales, because the Punch EV really is a fantastic product, and there has been cannibalization with the Nexon. But I think, it's still in the family. So I think that's what, the Punch has really achieved is, again, I keep repeating myself, just being absolutely true to concept and the aspirations of the car buyer, especially the first-time car buyer. Right. And, they've priced it competitively. It's in the category of the Exter and the Ignis. And clearly, as a product, it stands up as a much more substantial and robust product.
Exactly, Hormazd. And interestingly, Tata, typically with pricing, they've got so many variants in there. In fact, we'll try and fit them up all on the screen because they've got so many of them. So you've got, some very, very finely sliced kind of a cake, a lot of variants to choose from, a lot of price points. And interestingly enough, and what I like is they, as we know, they have facelifted, or rather not facelifted, they had the facelift introduced on the electric version.
And that's right. I would have imagined, I even thought that, even the ICE has got it, but it's not.
It's not.
So they've still got that card to play.
Exactly. And I think they've done it smartly, because, I mean, you look at EV buyer and you look at the Punch ICE buyer, they're actually really far apart in the price, and the EV is like the second car, as we know still now. Okay, you use it as a primary car maybe, but people tend to buy it after having experience in automobile.
Absolutely.
So I think, having this distinction in the style probably is helping it. And I hope Tata don't just, plonk the same sort of facelift. I know what
and jack up the price.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. On the Punch.
No, you're right. I think also it goes to show how well evolved this design is, and how it's still very relevant, and it's a design like a lot of Tata designs which will, age gracefully. We've seen that right with the Indica. It yes. kind of,
this still looks lovely.
Yeah, and we've seen that with a lot of Tata cars. But I think, again, as you said, they still got some, ammo in the arsenal.
Exactly.
I'm hoping, again, as an enthusiast, they come up with a turbo variant just as a hot compact SUV. Just a little bit maybe for the brand. Maybe they might do that when they see, as part of a life cycle enhancement, because clearly, it's still quite early into its life cycle.
Yes.
And I think also, it's a good reflection of how capable their first, all-new architecture on a small car is. The X4 or AMP platform is done very well. In fact, one of the reasons why the Punch and the Altroz to a certain extent had a pretty long development cycle was, the first time they were kind of working with this platform. It was an all-new platform which was, been developed. In fact, this platform was something that, even Volkswagen were impressed with. But that joint venture never happened. They were looking at doing VW products on this platform. So it's really been a great platform. I think they had some teething problems with it, but they've completely sorted it out once the models came out. I think earlier, they had safety. They had to make sure it was kind of enhanced to get a 5-star safety rating. So some development time went in that. But, net, you see that time, it was really well worth the kind of long cycle it was, because, Punch really has been, I think, a remarkable success, and success of Indian, let's say, engineering and ingenuity.
Exactly. Absolutely. In fact, the platform, I would be really excited to see what else is going to come on that, in fact, Hormazd, because like you said, we've got the Altroz and the Punch, and that's about it. And frankly, I thought they would do a lot more quicker with that, the platform. But yes, I guess what you said was right. It's taken a while for them to sort of develop it. It's from scratch. I mean, and we must remember, like when we say, let's say Wagon R, okay, it is, and also, like you said, very much an Indian company, Maruti in that sense. But they have a lot of platform development support coming from Suzuki.
That's right.
Tata have to do it all here. Exactly. There is no international partner. All of the expertise happens in. So I guess it does take some time. But what do you think should First of all, do you have a scoop on what's the next product on the platform?
I think the original plan was to have just 2 platforms.
Okay.
So you'd have all the small cars, including the Nexon and derivatives on the X4 platform. But I think it's not very, you don't really need to do that. I mean, it's costly. I think, they're still going to be focusing on the X4. It's worked for them. So I think, maybe at a much later stage when there are enough volumes to justify an all-new platform development, that's something they can do. So I think right now it's just going to be these 2 products on this platform. And clearly, we'll see more electrification coming out on this platform. So in that sense, I think, but we've got some great volumes on it. If you take both Altroz and this, that it's really paying off.
Pays for itself.
Exactly. But I think, just wrapping this podcast up, I think just to say that it's really been a fantastic, let's say, story of a company that, let's say, as a car maker is really not that old. I mean, it's just in 1998 and it's taken on global players. It's done it on its own without any partnership, without any joint venture. And that really is, you got to hand it to Tata Motors. That they've kind of managed, with their own resources, their own ingenuity and their understanding of their consumer, have managed to become the best-selling car in India in the first
half of the year at least.
Yeah, first half of the year. Yeah. So on that note, we'll end this session of Deep Drive. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you are driving and don't have time to view it, best to listen to us in the car. We think that's, where you really enjoy it. So you can, let's say log on to Spotify or the Apple podcast where we are also present. And to be notified on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you again, same time next week.